Hey, everybody, thanks for coming out in Vision 2022. We all know Mike Pagan. We just got to watch his outro, so this is his intro. Mike's been with NCI for a little over 22 years. Today's talking piece is a technical look at Azure and cloud technology. With that, Mike, anything else you want me to add?
Nope.
Floor is yours.
Awesome. So, if we haven't met, I'm Mike Pagan, Senior Solution Architect, Azure Product Manager with Network Center. Apologize if you were in my previous session. I believe in recycling, so I recycle my jokes. So you're gonna have to deal with the same jokes and sense of humor. I'm married. I have 3 kids, 2 cats, and a tortoise. And the tortoise is what ends up happening if you let your kid go to Merit Badge University and he takes reptile and amphibian studies. 2 weeks later, you have a credit card bill and a tortoise named Gordon. So, along with my certifications, I've given myself a merit badge also. So, I figured I funded it, I might as well get one too. But I've been described as a friend of mine described me as an outdoor enthusiast with a technology addiction. That's me and my family at Glacier National Park. If you haven't been, you should go. Pick a day that it's not rainy when you go hiking, but other than that, it's really quite great. So, when we plan sessions for Envision, we try to get together in June or July and talk about what we're going to talk about at Envision. Try to forecast what everybody's interested in, what type of things we want to talk about based on feedback, based on what we're seeing. And I wanted to, early this morning, I did something about a presentation about how to get into Azure. What do you need to consider? How to make your own estimates, how to build through that, what you need to take a look at. This afternoon, we're going to do more of a technical dive into some of the services that I think are interesting that people should take advantage of. But it's not necessarily going to be virtual machines. At this point in time, virtual machines are kind of boring. Everybody has them on site here, there, running them somewhere else isn't particularly, I find interesting. If that is not the case, let me know. Next year we'll do something different. But when you look at all the services that Azure offers, the little green box that I highlighted, that's virtual machines. And this isn't even the whole list. Now, there's some other services that tie to virtual machines, but there's tons of things in here that don't. So if you only think of any cloud platform, and I'm an Azure guy, but AWS or any of the rest of them is just virtual machines, you're missing out on all of the other things. So the services that I want to talk about today are virtual desktops, Azure Virtual Desktops. It used to be called Windows Virtual Desktops, which is different than Windows 365. I don't name these things. I don't know why they do this to me. But the other 3 are automation things. So Azure Automation, kind of an umbrella for a bunch of different services that tie together to collect information that you can act on. Azure Functions, code, you can trigger event-driven code, you can run serverless, and the logic apps, more of a workflow build-out to run code. So Azure Virtual Desktops, and I know desktops are virtual machines, and I said I wasn't going to talk about virtual machines, but to me, it's more about the 2 green boxes. So Azure Virtual Desktops makes the control plane, your remote desktop web access server, remote desktop gateway, your session broker, the diagnostic piece, the APIs, it does all of that for you. So if you've ever set up an RDS farm recently, all of those are components of that. And if you were going to be doing this on-prem, you'd have to set that up. And if you were doing this on your own in Azure, you'd have to configure your own virtual machines and configure this all on your own. This is now part of the platform. So when you go through and do your setup, all of that's there. You've got certificates on it. It's all set up. It talks to itself. The only thing after you get things set up is setting up your virtual machines, installing your apps on them, figuring out how many you want, and other things like that. Now, you can see that your users are on the left-hand side. They can connect through a VPN tunnel to it if you wanted to. But since there's a remote desktop gateway and the web access servers, you can run all of this across the internet. It's all HTTPS secured without VPN tunnels. So if you're running Citrix or remote desktop services now where there's client VPNs involved, this helps you get rid of that if that's something you can do from a security standpoint. On top of it, you can also run, they have images that come with FS Logics, which is Microsoft's profile remote profile software they purchased a couple of years ago, and it's just free with your services now. You can store your remote profiles, your roaming profiles, on an Azure storage account, Azure Storage Files account. You don't have to have a file server with shares to share these profiles like we've always had to do roaming profiles on them. And the benefit of doing that is that it's much more scalable, it delivers much more uptime, and at the same time, there isn't a server to take care of. So there isn't a server to upgrade, there isn't anything to do patching on. Any of those types of tasks are abstracted away. So why would you use virtual desktops? A lot of it's the same reasons we'd use virtual desktops now. So to replace something that you already have, because we want our users, our end users, to connect closest to the data as possible, provides them the best experience. It doesn't do you any good to put all your servers in Azure and run your app locally through a tunnel. Performance is probably going to be poor. They're probably going to ride you out of there on a rail. Other use cases you can think about is if you're going to do contractors, if you're going to need somebody to come in and do temporary work. We're all having a hard time finding enough people to do the tasks we need to do. If some of it's business-related tasks, if this was a part of your platform, you can give them desktops, you can secure them so they can only get access to certain things. They can get in, they can do the tasks. When they're done, you can delete them or kick them back out. Hybrid worker, the same thing. Where are you finding your employees nowadays? Depending on your business, you may find the best candidates don't want to move to North Dakota in the middle of winter. You may find somebody who is a really great candidate but wants to stay in Florida because they don't like North Dakota in the winter. So the way the world works now, why would you turn away a qualified candidate if you don't have to? It's got to work with your business model. It's got to work with how you do business. But these types of things offer you those types of suggestions. We just went through a pandemic, and we all had to work remote. Most of us had to work remote. This probably isn't going away. I've heard of Fortune 500 companies that said everybody has to come back to the office. And a really smart thing a headhunter company did is they contacted everyone on LinkedIn who were told they had to go to the office to get them to come to their company because they offered hybrid or remote work. That is brilliant, and it's cutthroat, but that's the way the world works now. And then if you're going to do mergers and acquisitions, how do you quickly integrate another company into your organization using your applications? This could be another use case. How do you secure access? There's no VPN required. You can use the RDP, the remote desktop client, to connect securely across the internet. You can add multi-factor authentication to it as a part of the platform. Your Azure AD users, multi-factor authentication, you include the insider risk protection, all those things all come in as a part of the package. And then, normally we think RDS, it's just desktops and apps and, some web pages, that kind of thing. But Azure has GPU-enabled desktops, so you can run engineering apps, CAD, imaging, those types of things in a desktop that you hand out to these users. Engineering companies are doing it currently. If you need it, it's available. It's expensive, but if you can't buy the $12,000 engineering laptop fast enough for how fast your company is hiring, and this is available, this has its place. So when we create Azure Virtual Desktop, you basically get two ways of handing out your desktops. You create your host pools. You can do pools desktops, which is similar to what we're used to in RDS farms. You have multiple servers and you have multiple users stack up on any of the other servers. But any given day, you don't know which server you're going to be on. You roam, depending on workload, you're going to get one or the other. Or you can do personal desktops, which are you're assigned desktop A. Next time you sign in, you get desktop A, and then so on and so forth. If desktop A isn't available, you don't sign in. You have to get it fixed or get reassigned another desktop. So there's two ways to do it, and you can do both at the same time. So you can have multiple session pools up in Azure to hand out your apps. The options for operating systems, standard RDS operating systems, 2016, 2019, 2022, and more of the VDI operating systems. Windows 10 and Windows 11, just standard desktops that we know. Now, Microsoft also makes a multi-user version of Windows 10 and Windows 11. and it's the same Windows, but it allows you to have multiple sessions on a Windows client operating system at one time. So you don't, if you have applications that hate being run on a server, or your users don't like that experience, or you want to provide something else that's available in Windows 10 or Windows 11 for them to log in, if they just like, I don't want this to look any different than I log into normally, we can do that. And you can only run multi-user Windows 10 and 11 in Azure at this point. They have no plans, they've announced no plans of being able to run it locally if you're going to run Horizon or Citrix or any of the other VDI platforms on-prem. So that's the only place you can get it. And then when you're, building these things are neat, but you have to think about how you're going to maintain it, what you're going to do. So that's the DevOps graphic in the corner there. If you've never heard of it, the idea is you want your services, your functions, your servers, your end user desktops to be more like cattle than pets. As soon as you name something, it becomes a lot harder to not take it to the vet, not feed it special cat food, get it groomed, all those types of things. If you have a cow that keeps breaking out and gets uppity and charges your truck, you're going to have steak dinner. This doesn't matter. You're going to replace it with something else. So you create an environment that's easy to replace and kind of builds itself, instead of these very customized operating systems that take 10 hours to build, and okay, an update broke something, okay, now we have to build it again. You create it such where it's easy to deploy. So in Azure, when you're doing virtual desktops, you can do your pets methodology, you can use Windows updates, you can use Azure updates, you can use an RMM tool on there, you can do it manually if you don't have a whole bunch of them, and do your updates that way. Or you look at it from the cattle perspective, is you have a Windows desktop, you install your apps, you get it updated, you turn it into a template, and then you deploy it into your session pool. So you have 10 desktops, now you have 20 desktops, you get your users to log into 10 new ones, and you get rid of the other ones. So that's the methodology. So if you're thinking about these types of things, think about how much care and feeding it takes to make your apps work. So benefit of doing it in Azure, because it is a metered-based service. Anything that's on, you're going to pay for. So we want to be able to save money. So Azure has a couple of different methodologies out there we can use. You can use auto-scaling plan, or Azure automation, and a runbook to turn your servers on and off and make them on when you're busy and off when you're not. So you kind of see the example. In the morning, you'd start with 2 virtual session hosts. Users start logging in. It detects that you might need more resources. More users are going to log in. Turns on another one. Users sign in, so on and so forth. And then you can collapse it when you're at the end of the day and you're not going to have any users on in the evening, to collapse that down to like 1 or 2 being available. And the benefit is it can save you a lot of money. If you're going to do these things pay as you go, when it's off, you don't pay for it. You don't pay for licensing, you don't pay for compute. So here's an example of what the client looks like. It kind of looks like anything that we've seen recently from Microsoft and the clients. You get it from Microsoft Store, or Microsoft download it straight from their website. It's a unified client, so you can connect to Azure Virtual Desktops, Windows 365, or your published apps. Down below there, you can see there's the individual apps. So if you wanted to hand out just one app through Azure Virtual Desktop, you could definitely do that. On the far right-hand side, you can see it's got the full desktop. So you can mix and match what you hand out based on what your needs are. The client runs on Mac OS, iOS, Android, Linux through the web client. I don't know that there's a native Linux client yet, and many thin clients, which mostly run Linux. Left-hand side there's a Mac, I'll say a laptop, running Windows. It's not in parallel. So, and then on the right-hand side, it's basically what the Android experience looks like on a phone. And we've had this for a while, but when you think about supply chain issues, if you think about hybrid working, if you think about security, do you want to hand out desktops that somebody's going to use from home, connect to the same network that their Xbox and PlayStation, their kids' tablets, and their kids' friends, and anyone else who's guessed your Wi-Fi password network's ever touched? Or do you want to run in an AVD bit of a silo there on these machines. Makes it faster to roll out technology. You don't have to worry about provisioning things. End users generally like it more because it's not a separate thing that they have to carry. Another use that I always joke about, but actually makes sense is, some people in your organization really just need an iPad. They only want an iPad. They don't want to carry a laptop. They don't want to do any of those types of things. If they do have to get in to approve timesheets or do something and it's not a web app, you can put the remote desktop client on there. They all likely have keyboards with them, so they can turn it basically into a thin client. Another thing is, I know there's a thin client. Most thin client vendors, they make their hardened OS to run on their equipment, but they also make their operating systems run on a USB key that you can put in any computer, boot to it, and it boots their secure hardened OS. If it's pre-configured to connect to AVD, connect to the desktop, whatever they're sitting in front of turns into a thin client. They connect to AVD. They can work. When they're done, they turn it off, they take out the USB stick, and it doesn't modify their computer at all. So when you talk about remote work, hybrid, contractors, that can be a use case. Those USB sticks are about $100 versus imaging and provisioning, shipping a contractor a laptop and worrying about what's on it and updates and all those types of things. That is kind of a compelling use case. The web client looks very, very similar to the installed client. It works on basically any browser that's HTML5 compatible. So that's pretty much all of them at this point. But you can see it shows the power, the published apps and the full desktop. And basically on a Linux workstation, you can run Windows in a browser. It's kind of trippy. So that's Azure Virtual Desktop. Just kind of ripping through that. Azure Automation is basically an umbrella of services that all start when you install an agent on your workstation. It collects information. From there, you can act on it. So going around the horn there, configuration management has a couple of different silos to it. Inventory, change tracking, and you can do desired state configuration, which is if you know Ansible or Puppet or any of those types of DevOps technologies, you can do that through Azure. Basically, it's collecting all these bits of information. A lot of times to go, why would I want to track changes on a Windows workstation? Or why do I need to do an inventory? If you ever talk to a security person, the first thing they tell you is you need to have an inventory of everything that's on all of your systems. And it's not a spreadsheet. You can't act fast enough on a spreadsheet to know these pieces of software on there or this was removed. This type of service can help you keep tabs on all of that. Update management, you can control your Windows updates with this. If you hate WSS, then this is another way you can do Windows updates if you don't have any other method to do it. It tracks and does reporting and things on it. And then the process automation, that's basically runbooks. So you can do Python or PowerShell runbooks to act on services in Azure or through a hybrid connector on-prem. And with all of these things, I hate just presentations just talk about automate things, because I get lost in what do I want to automate? Like, sure I can do that, but it doesn't make any sense. So I have some examples of what I've used it for, just in my own environments. So hopefully some of that makes sense. But the other part there is integration. So as soon as you have this information and it's in the platform, you can act on it or you can report on it. So if you have information in inventory and inventory's changed, you can set up an Azure alert to send you an email on it. If you want to run a logic app to do something, to run a runbook, you can do that. So as soon as these things are kind of interconnected, it's a platform you can use to automate many things. So before I get into the examples, what can you automate? And this is what I fall apart in some presentations. You can automate anything. Well, that's focused enough. I need to know something specific. But if you're thinking about something you want to automate, I'm not a good enough coder or scripter to be able to figure this out on my own. I steal from everyone I can. There's plenty of people that love to write blog posts about the neat things that they've done. They put their code on GitHub. It's a good way to start to take a look at things and how to use that to build what you need. So what should we automate? In my opinion, tasks that you're not any good at or you don't like doing. I don't like creating new users on my environment because I have to touch about 5 different systems and it takes me a whole bunch of time and I generally screw one of them up and then I have to start all the way over. And it's kind of frustrating to go through that. steps, tasks that take multiple steps. So anything that might run and need to run for in half an hour, 45 minutes, doesn't really, but you have to remember to go manually do the next step. If you have a task that can wait for that to finish and then do the next thing, at least it'll be done instead of going at 4 o'clock, go, oh wait, I started that thing at 8 this morning. Is it done? Yes. Okay, now I can do the next step, never having finished it. Maybe you're not forgetful. I am. I forget a bunch of stuff. Things you forget to do. If you're going to set up any sort of automation, like offboarding or any of those types of tasks, I don't want to sit around my computer waiting for somebody to say, okay, their last day was today, but they left early, so shut down their accounts. Well, you can make a runbook run off a webhook, which is a URL that's you send to their manager. They would click on it. It would trigger the runbook. It would do those tasks, and it'd be done. It wouldn't involve talking to an admin to finish it. And mostly, the examples that I'm doing next are to solve a problem. I had an issue that I decided to solve with automation, mostly to kind of learn the platform, to figure out what I could do, and then the more I've worked through them, the more beneficial I found it. So in Azure Automation, I have set up a runbook to do onboarding. That's most of what the thing is here. I don't know if you can see it all, but some of it's blurred out anyway. But I've cobbled together a bunch of different pieces of code because when you create new users nowadays, if you're in a hybrid environment like we run, you have to talk to Active Directory, you have to go to your hybrid Exchange box, and you have to make a remote mailbox, and you have to wait for the user to sync to Azure Active Directory. You have to put them in Azure AD groups. You have to provision a license. Then you have to, our CRM software requires special permissions to the mailbox. You have to run a script to give them special permissions to the mailbox. That's way more things than I want to do in any given day. So I have figured out, through using blog posts and trial and error, 205 lines of code that will do that for me. And then I declare the variables. So in the middle there, I put in their first name, last name, where they're located, title, and manager. And click go. And that's about it. Now I'm precise, so I kind of watch it. It's kind of fun to sit and watch it go all the way through, but I don't have to. And in about 10 minutes, it's done all those things. The mailbox is created, the password is configured, and it's ready to go. And it is less time, 10, 15 minutes, than it is to log into my domain controller and do those things, and then log into my Exchange server and do those things, then wait for the thing to sync, and then go up and do all the different things manually. So that's an example of how you can use a runbook. And this uses the hybrid connector, so it's doing things on-prem and it's doing things in Azure. It doesn't have to be just Azure. It can reach into your environment and do those tasks also. Another thing that I've used Azure Automation for is you can see that it tracks status of Windows events, or status of Windows services, Linux services, Windows events. It can monitor files and folders, track registry keys, and software that's on the system. This isn't a particularly busy server, but you can see that on the bottom there, it's Windows services reported a bunch of different statuses for whatever reason, and the data is kind of listed there below. So the problem that I solved using change tracking is our CRM software had a email robot service that was acting up. Couldn't exactly figure out why. It would stop and start and stop, start and stop and start, and eventually just stop. And didn't send out any emails. And unless you sent somebody an email through the ticketing system and you were waiting for a reply, you just go on about your day. And then a day or so later, everybody goes, that person didn't reply to any of my tickets. And everybody goes, hey, nobody's replied to any of our tickets for 2 days. That's a problem. That's a customer service issue. So since it's connected to change tracking, I can see the information. So I can see in the red highlighted state, the state changed to stopped. It was previously running. So now I have all that data, and I can do something with it. So how I eventually the software fixed itself through updates, but how I avoided losing a bunch of sent email, having it all delayed, was since the information was in the platform and logged in log analytics, I can run a query, and that's the box on the left-hand side, to look for when the status goes to stopped. Wait for 3 minutes, and if it's still stopped, create an alert to send me an email that this service has stopped. So now I have some indication that that has stopped. Now there is a million other ways to do that. You could use PRTG, you could just create a scheduled task that literally starts that task every minute. But this is a way to use this platform to do that. Azure Functions, again, is running code, but it's serverless. Much like Runbooks, there isn't any infrastructure to stand up. This is more code-based than the next thing we're going to talk about. So it's mostly PowerShell or different versions that trigger off events. So like a timer or a webhook or a couple of other options in there, and then basically execute your code. So I created a couple of different things. If you've never seen XKCD, it's a nerd comic. It's pretty funny if you're nerdy like me. But they did one about passwords, password lengths. And basically, the longer your password is, the better it is. But I hate alphanumeric passwords when you have to give it to an end user because they're never going to remember it. So the gist of the comic is to use words that you can remember that aren't really related. So at the end, they pick correct battery horse staple, that's their password. But it's long, so it's very secure, but a human can remember it. So I thought that was really interesting. I wonder if there's a password generator out there to do it. So I found some online, and then I found one that I could run as a PowerShell script. So I got it working locally. I'm like, well, this would be really cool if I made it into an Azure function that anybody at work could use it. So that's what I did. I used code that I found that, as a function that triggers off of a webhook. And once it's out there, you can use it for other things. So the next iteration of my onboarding script is going to call this password generator to generate the password, so I'm never going to know it, and then email their manager, that's defined in the script, what that password is. So it isn't a static thing in script. Because if somebody ever gets into your Azure and looks at the runbook, they say, okay, I can run this, and I know what the password is. And they conceivably they could use that to go do other things. The idea is to take all of that stuff out. Static anything, passwords or keys in your code is a bad idea. So if you trust running QR codes, you can snap that. It should give you a password. Refresh it, it gives you a different password. The other one, which hopefully it works, it didn't work up until like 1 o'clock actually, is this is something I did last year to talk about Azure Functions, but I think it's kind of an interesting thing because a lot of times automation is very abstract. It's hard to make anybody make it do anything. It's visual, you can't see it. It's like, oh great, you created 200 users. Your CFO doesn't care. But if you make a lamp work, maybe that's something that somebody will find interesting. Like, oh wait, you can do things with it. So it's not particularly practical, but it's more about you can make a PowerShell script, find some code, and make it do something that affects the real world. Now, after I had created it, I thought of a couple different ways we could do it. They're kind of cheesy, but our help desk, at the end of every ticket, you get the ability to review, smiley face, neutral face, frowny face, green, yellow, red. What if we had a lamp like this in our call center, and every time we got a review, it would light that color. It kind of engages people to know that, hey, you just got an email that's just going to swing to your, like, hey, we did a good job today. Hey, well, somebody else did a good job. I think that kind of thing is kind of engaging, personally. And obviously, people have been running it, so it worked. 2 for 2. So now Azure Logic Apps is running automation, but it's less code-based. So it is less PowerShell or Python code, and it's more workflow. So if you aren't a great programmer, myself included, this might be something that works more for you. So Azure Functions, any sort of integration, any sort of data manipulation that you have is going to be through the code. The Logic apps have connectors to a lot of many different services already. So you may have to install like an integration pack to talk to your Salesforce or Dropbox or any of the rest of those services, but it's available. You don't have to code it yourself. So if you've ever used If That Then This service from a number of years ago, it's automation. It's things like, okay, if I post something on Facebook, also tweet it and also send an email or those types of things. That and Microsoft Flow, now it's Power Automate Flow or whatever they're calling it now, same type of thing. So here's kind of what it looks like. It's more about tasks and picking the tasks. You can put a little bit of code in it, but it's more like how I think about scripting because I'm not a programmer. So I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to take it, and then do this, if this, then that. That's how my mind works for programming. That's basically the way this thing lays out. So there's a couple of built-in templates out there. I don't know if they're exactly make a lot of sense to me, but you can kind of see how it would work. So one of the examples is, if you had a business partner that only wanted to share files with Dropbox and they're a pain in the butt and they didn't want to send you a OneDrive or send you an email or whatever. It's like, is it a Dropbox? You go get it. Well, you can create a logic app that looks, okay, that file is there, now copy it someplace where you want it, in like your OneDrive. Or send an email when a new item's added to a SharePoint list, if you can't already do that through SharePoint itself. Once you approve, they have about 30 or so different built-in ones like that. So when I was looking at doing custom ones that made a little more sense, I thought about some things for myself that I wanted to find something to do. And then I did some research online and I found somebody had made a logic app that did those things. It's great. So I just used that as the basis of what I ended up doing. And I did also ask for some examples, and somebody else also gave me an example, and that same blog did the same thing. So we're going to go through those two things right now. So the first one is, if you've ever tied any third-party SaaS service with your Active Directory, you know that you have to do an app registration. When you do the app registration, it creates a client secret that shows up on that page once. If you navigate away from the page, the secret doesn't show up anymore, so you have to recreate it. But those also typically, I think the default expiration date is 6 months, but you can stretch it out 2 years. You can do a custom one if you wanted, but they're going to expire. And if you're like me, you're going to forget that you ever did it as soon as you did it. So usually you're 2 screens up and you're going through the setup guide and you create your secret and you copy and paste, go, yep, cool, connected, navigate away from it, and you're never going to think about it ever again. If you're super organized, maybe you create a calendar item to remind yourself in 2 years minus 2 days to go out there and renew that. Congratulations, you're more organized than I am. So there's this example is basically a logic app that runs. I configured it, the reoccurrence to run once a week. I set the date, the time, all those things. It uses the Graph API to connect to Azure Active Directory, to look for these client secrets, and to send an email to expire within, the default was 30 days. So if it looks for client secrets and it's going to expire in 30 days, it sends an email to whatever email address you have in there. Gives you time to fix it before it expires and breaks whatever integration that you've set up and having a bad Monday or Saturday, or what, they never break when you're sitting there looking at it, so it's always a bad day. So if you look here kind of at the example, and you're not going to be able to read it, but as you can see, it's broken out into tasks. The first one is recurrence. Second is like, I'm going to collect the login information to attach to the Graph API, connect to the Key Vault to collect that information. It's going to connect the Graph API. It's going to get the information. It's going to look for these particular things. It's going to put it in a for each loop. It's going to look for this data. If this, send an email. If not, go on to the next one. Another example is 365 licensing. It doesn't take as long as it needs to create 365 licensing anymore. Basically, you have to order it online or talk to a vendor. Brady's pretty fast about setting it up, but it might, from the phone call or email, says, hey, I need these licenses. I forgot I have 10 people starting today. I'm out of licenses. It might take most of the morning to go through and get those out there so you can continue your provisioning. And you don't want to keep extra licensing around because you're paying for it whether you're using it or not. $22 a month times 10, actual money. So this Logic app does very similar things. Runs once a week, looks up all the licensing SKUs, and will send an email if the licensing count is less than the trigger, which in this is 10. And if you look at this later or get the slide deck, that's where I found the example code. I'll make sure he gets that excellent person, saved me a ton of work, gets acknowledged there. But it's the same type of thing. Recurrence, task, very task oriented. If you can make a Visio diagram, workflow, you can work through these types of things. Here's kind of a zoom in of what some of those different components are. On the top left side is the recurrence, once a week, run on Monday, certain time zone. The bottom part is what it's connecting to. The Graph API is now the king of how to connect to anything 365 or Azure Active Directory. And then on the right-hand side is kind of the logic about when it gets the information, what is it going to do with it? How is it going to take a look at it? You can kind of see on the right-hand side if it's how many licenses, if a number of available licenses greater than 0, but less than 10. If it's true, send an email. And I format that email with the information that's collected to look however I want, and then set the send to address. And then false, it doesn't do anything. Here's the output of these Logic apps. The one on the left, I get 10 of these every morning, or every Monday morning, because we have set up a bunch of demo things, and I'm too lazy to go out there and finish it. But eventually, I won't be lazy, and I'll clean them up because I'm tired of getting all these emails now. But you can see that it has the details. It has the secret ID, and the display name, which this app didn't have a display name, the expiration date, so I can categorize accordingly to know if I should do this one first or this one second. And then that link, if you click on it, it should take me directly to that page. After I authenticate, it's where I can renew that certificate. The one on the right is just an example of the running out of licensing email. I couldn't find it gives you the SKU name. That is not a friendly name. Some of those come through quite ugly. This one was a pretty easy one to figure out what it was, but it's Microsoft_Teams_Rooms_Pro. Some of the other ones were kind of abstract. I didn't find a way, but I could put a translation in here that this means this, or only look for this. I get probably 20 of these emails because of licensing. I have less than 10 of them. Well, in this case, I only have 6 Teams rooms. I would want to automate this out of the system because I don't need this email because this is okay. But you can see the information comes through, it gives me the SKU, licenses that I have, and how many I have available. So overall, we've talked about Azure Virtual Desktops, how that control plane allows it to make it easier to get access to essentially RDS or virtual desktops. And a couple of different ways we can use to get automation. So Azure Automation Runbooks, we can run PowerShell code or Python code in there. We can trigger it with a webhook. We can trigger it with Logic apps, other input. Azure Functions, it's more event-driven, so like a timer or a webhook. I think you can tie it to Event Hub. And then Logic apps, which is less code, but still a way to do automation. There is a way that these examples, there's a code view, and I'm not a programmer, and I swear if I printed it, it's this long. I would never, ever be able to do that. So this example, which was these 2 examples for the Logic apps, where somebody had made them in a template. So it's basically a JSON file that you can take this exact code and run it, import it in your environment, and then just modify the dates and who you send the email to, and you have it. You don't have to know how to code. You don't need to know how to do any of the rest of it. Now, I suggest you review it to make sure it doesn't delete all your resources. So far, I haven't heard of any of those types of things out there, and I'd hope that they would get nuked pretty fast, but always have some idea of what you're doing. And then we also talked about how I used Azure Automation, like the change tracking, to help me figure out if a service didn't start. It also can be useful from a security standpoint of, hey, why do you have this piece of software on there? Or looking at a folder, why are these, if you have, I had an example recently that another mail robot type of thing wasn't sending email properly, and it put the failed email in a folder, but didn't do any alerting or anything. It just said, yep, I tried to send the email, that's it. Unless I'm manually gonna go check that, which nobody has time for that, you could create rules to go look in that folder, and if the files show up, it gets notified. It can actually pull the contents of those files in, so you can see what's actually in those files too. Yeah, it's pretty cool. You know, what else could I have talked about? Azure Cost Management, which is kind of the new engine to take a look at your existing Azure spend and to figure out what you're spending the money on. A lot of times questions I get is, why did my Azure bill go up $300? I have no idea, let's take a look. Well, you can take a look at it and go, oh, my compute cost changed at this date. Oh yeah, we were working with whomever and we didn't have enough resources on this virtual machine, so we made it bigger. Now that changed that cost. If you've ever gotten we used to get, when we had to do those analysis, we'd get a giant spreadsheet from a distributor and have to get into pivot tables to start figuring that out. That's not a place anybody wants to be when you're talking about a lot of money. So that's neat. Azure File Sync is services that allow you to take, much like DFS, run something locally to copy files into an Azure Files account, Azure storage account, do a file shares up in Azure for disaster recovery, or if you're kind of migrating things, you want your files in both locations. That should say Microsoft Purview, they renamed it. If you were in Todd's presentation earlier, it's all about data governance. So Microsoft is starting to add tools to get data governance. They combine some Microsoft 365 audit and compliance tools and some existing things they started building in Azure, and they put it all under the Microsoft Purview umbrella. So if you're in a regulated industry, that space is very interesting, and it's gonna be growing very rapidly. And then it's not particularly flashy, but Azure Active Directory Premium. It comes in some of the different bundles, like Business Premium. If you buy it separately, there's single self-service password reset. There's the ability to put an agent locally in your domain controller to have a password list that you don't allow. So if you don't want to allow fall 2022 or winter 2023, if everybody's fought with that, this agent installs locally. And when somebody is trying to change their password, it checks with this list, and in Azure, it says, nope, you can't do that, and denies your password request. So you have to choose something different. So that is included in that service you likely already have. There's things like App Proxy, which allow for secure proxied access to web services in your building without opening HTTPS ports. So if you had one app that you needed to do something with, you can install App Proxy. It's all authenticated with Azure Active Directory to create the tunnel to get connected to it. It's really interesting. I think more people should take a look at that, but that's included in it. So I'm almost out of time. There's my contact information. If you want to see what the code looks like for this LAMP demo, I put it out on GitHub. I borrowed it. I didn't make it. So disclaimers, if it's broken, I probably can't fix it. I might be able to fix it now, but the first year I could totally not fix it at all. So thanks for coming. Does anybody have any questions while we're still here? I understand this is after lunch, but yes, sir.
Mike, first of all, thanks for the demonstration and all the great information here. I was going to kind of open this up. You were talking about virtual desktops now. The organization that I'm at, we had a lot of problems with the FX Logic portion of virtual desktops, and we've been unable, even with Microsoft, to kind of pin down a solution for when FX Logic has profile disk issues. So I was just wondering if anybody in this room has experienced that, or if my organization is unique to that. I don't see anybody raising their hands.
I've had that issue before. When I built my ABD environment, FS Logic worked fantastic.
Yeah.
And so then worked with Microsoft, which you called them, it's the rollout wheel, you never know what you're gonna get. Usually you get somebody that goes, not our problem, close the ticket. We escalated, and finally said, should we go back? Well, no, you shouldn't go back, but this older version works. And they ended up upgrading just to a latest version that came out, and it fixed it, it was stable, they left it. My version, and I couldn't tell you right now,
Sure,
I'll talk later, but my version, which was from last year, I still haven't upgraded it because of this project, we had those problems. I've had zero issues since then. So, you might want to just look back at, we can chat later, and we can contact info.
You're not gonna charge me for that, are you?
I'm not going to.
So
Appreciate that.
to that point, I did run into a customer environment that was having issues, that was working flawlessly with FS Logix up to a point, and there was a Microsoft hotfix that was included in about August or July this year that broke something in FS Logix, and even with an updated version of it. And what's worse, if you've dealt with Microsoft hotfixes, it was a hotfix that came out individually, and then it got rolled up in the other hotfix, so then it disappeared. So if you were looking for it, and it made it that much harder to find, because it doesn't show, if you do like git hotfix, it didn't show up anymore. I'm like, okay, well, it's not that issue. And me and another coworker spent a couple of days on it. I stumbled on a Reddit post that was literally about this long. It was probably like 10 pages long, of people that had run into the same thing about the same time. And it was something they did that broke the file locking. So if you got into the system, you were fine. If you had logged out and tried to get back in, you weren't fine anymore. And if it triggered, no one else got back in.
Yep.
And the fix is to uninstall it. Uninstall that particular hotfix. And I know which one it is. It should be burned in my brain, but I don't have it right now. And then I also found out that Microsoft has a way to set up a group policy that says, do not install this hotfix no matter what. So you don't have somebody coming behind you and go, oh, I need to do Windows updates. Boop. And then 2 days later, you're back in the same boat again. So yes, all of these things are going to be integrated. I'll get you that hotfix number. But overall, FS Logix has been pretty good. But you're at that point in time, you're relying on the whole system, the whole ecosystem of nothing additionally causing problems. And then you might have apps that don't work with that. Roaming profiles in themselves were good, but kind of terrible. FS Logix is a lot better, but it's also very customizable. So you can get yourself into the weeds about including and excluding things that are part of your roaming profile. So there's just some efforts there that you kind of need to spend some time in.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Anything else? Well, I appreciate you coming. If you're not tired of me yet, I think I'm in another session, a panel discussion later this afternoon. I have to figure out what time it is. So, but if nothing else, if you have any questions, hit me up in the hall, send me an email or something. I'd be happy to talk more about any of this. So have a good day. Thanks for coming in, Vision.